All right, welcome to Wismo Technologies. This is Mallikarjun here. Quickly, I'm going to demonstrate on the administration or the maintenance of my rack cluster or the cluster administration or bouncing your cluster services or cluster daemons or the cluster resources. So the common questions, how you are going to bounce your rack cluster, real application cluster. The simple answer is using SRCTL tool. Sorry, as using CRCTL tool. The CRCTL is stands for your cluster control utility, the cluster ready service control utility. That's CRCTL tool. We're going to use it to bounce my cluster services or the cluster daemons or the cluster resources. Why do we need bounce this rack cluster? We bounce this rack cluster to perform such activities like patching, like maintenance, planned or unplanned maintenance, or some any cluster configuration changes, or any of the cluster administration, the cluster setting changes, or so on. These are the few examples when you need to bounce your rack cluster. What's the impact if you bounce your rack cluster? If you bounce your rack cluster, underlining your ASM instance, underlining your database instances, underlining all your database services or cluster resources, everything will be down. So the next question is, which user is authorized to perform this bounce or the have permission to do this cluster bounce activity? So Oracle user, of course, no. He don't have any access to bounce the cluster. The grid user, of course, no. Even though grid is a cluster owner, he don't have authority to bounce the cluster. He will say when you try to do with the grid user, try to stop the cluster, it says that you do not have a sufficient privileges. Then who is going to bounce? Who is authorized to bounce this cluster? Right? Oracle database owner, no. Grid or ASM owner, no. Only the root user can perform this stop activity, class stop cluster or the bounce cluster. In real-time world, all the DBA will be having a sudo access to root. The user who log into that Oracle server, it may be the DBA his own ID, or he might be using a Oracle user ID, or he may be using a grid user ID. This Oracle user ID or the grid user ID or his own ID will be having a sudo access to root, and they're going to do sudo su root, and then they can perform this cluster bounce activity. All right, let's get started on the rack cluster setup here in my lab. So I have a two node rack setup here. So I have a node one, that is my host node one, where plus ASM1 DavidDB database one, DavidDB instance one is running, and I have this host node two, where my ASM instance two and DavidDB instance 2 is running. So it's basically two node rack cluster. Both my grid and ASM owner is Oracle, and my database owner is sorry, but both my ASM and grid owner is Oracle, and my database owner is Oracle. So Oracle is a single owner, database owner as well as my grid owner, both are Oracle. So very first thing, I want to check the cluster resource or the daemon status. So I can use crctl check cluster on node 1. That's going to tell me my node 1 cluster status. It says now crctl check cluster, crctl command not found because we have not set the environmental variable. So I'm going to set it to plus asm1 on node 1. On node 2, I'm going to set it to plus asm2. And remember, I logged in with the Oracle user. That's a grid owner. So this check status can be done with any user, either a grid user or the root user. Anything this works fine here. But when it comes to stop bouncing the cluster, that's where you need a root user. For Oracle user or the grid user doesn't work. Right, I can check for the node 1 specific crctl check cluster. It says cluster ready service, your CSS and event manager is all online on node 1. And then I'll go to second node, or I'll go to first node, I'll do the same command, and that also says everything is online. So it has to be like go to each node and run it. So I don't want to do that one. So is there any option I can directly run it from one cluster node and access the other? Right. So from one single node, I can run it. crctl check. cluster hyphen all, you're gonna get the details from all the cluster nodes. I can do it from node 1. I can get the details from all the cluster node. I can do it from the second node. Again, I can get the details from all the nodes. Right. Again, as I said, these command status check, check cluster, these are like non-destructive. So you can run it with the Oracle user. Even you can run with the root user. Like I can log into root user here, set the environmental variable, and I can run the same command crctl check cluster. It can get you the same result. I can see crctl check cluster all. It's gonna give us the same result. These are non-destructive, non you know impacting commands which can be run with any user. Fair enough. I can pass the specific node details. crctl check cluster hyphen n node 1 and node 2. That also give me the node wise details or the node wise service status or the cluster resource status. I can do it from node 1 or node 2 and get the details of node 1 or node 2 or any cluster node. Everything works fine. So this is your cluster wide details. So now I can go each individual specific resource, cluster resource wise. crctl check CRS from all the cluster node. These commands I'm going to run it from all the cluster node. This crctl check CRS is going to give me all the resource, cluster resource in one shot on that particular node. Like let's say if I do it from node 1, my HAS, OHSD, CRSD, CSSD, and event manager all are it's going to say online. If I do it from node 2, the node 2 specific HASD, OHSD, CRSD, and CSSD and event manager all are online. So I can go with individual service wise, like crctl check CSS, crctl check CSS, right? So your CSS is online. There's a two types check here. I can remove that one. Right. So crctl check EVM, that's event manager, and crctl check CTSSD cluster synchronization service daemon, crctl HAS, that's a Oracle high availability service daemon. Everything is online on that particular node 2. Same thing you can do it from node 1 as well. Check CRS, check CSS, check event manager, check your CTSSD cluster synchronization time synchronization service daemon, check HAS Oracle high availability service. Everything is online, that node 1 or node 2 specific. So this is your cluster services, core services. Now you can do crctl stat resource hyphen D from node 1 or node 2 that's going to give you all the cluster wide information in a tabular format. Hyphen T is for tabular format. So if I do crctl stat resource, that will not be human readable. That will be just a human readable, but that will be of line by line. So if you use hyphen T, this will be in a beautiful tabular column. So it's going to first give you local resource of the node 1, and then the local resource of node 1 and node 2. What's the status? Listener, CH, and net1, ONS, proxy ADVM, and the cluster resource. Your ASM net listener, data disk group, scan listener 123, OCR disk group, record disk group, your ASM instance, and ASM net1 network, CVU, Dev database, DevDB database, your node 1 or node 2 VIP, your QMOS server, scan 123 VIP, your test database, your UAT database. What is the status? Everything you can get it from any of the cluster node. I'll go to node 2. With a root user, I can run the same command. I can get the same output. That is your entire node 1, node 2 cluster and local resource information. And I want to see only the node 1 or node 2 specific, the init cluster daemons. That will be crctl stat resource hyphen T hyphen init. That's going to give you only that cluster resource. So I'll do it from node 1. I can get this cluster resource details of node 1. The same command I can do it from node 2. I can get the cluster resource details from node 2. Again, in our next or future classes, I'm going to explain about each of these cluster resource and what's the meaning of this target state and what is this state and what is this offline mode, online mode, what is this observer mode. So we'll discuss in our in future session. So these are your cluster resource at cluster side. So all these resources are running at your OS side as a daemons. So you can do ps-f grep d.bin. That will give you all the cluster daemons. So your OHSD, Vora root agent, Vora agent, EVMD, event manager, MDNSD, GPNPD, event logger, GIPCD, CSSD monitor, OCSSD, CSSD agent, OCSSD, OCTSSD, OLogger, CRSD, Vora agent, Vora root agent, your listener, all those things. From node 2, you can see all the cluster daemons. Same thing, node 1 also, you can see all the cluster daemons. Again, what is this reboot? All those things we'll discuss in future classes. Right now, I need to bounce my cluster. I can do crctl stop crs hyphen f, that's a force, and without hyphen f, that's a without force option. You can do it from all the node. So I can log into node 1. Right now, node 1, I am at a Oracle user. If I do crctl stop crs, that's gonna stop your cluster resources on node 1. But this command is gonna fail, saying that Oracle user, that's a grid user or the ASM user, has insufficient players. So this stop command works only with the root user. So without root user, you cannot do it. Let's go to second node where I logged in as a root user. Let's run that on crctl stop crs, and then this is be able to stop your cluster resources on this node 2. Right. So once the node 2 is stopped, you can do same thing crctl check crs on node 2. That is stop. It will stop all the cluster resources, local resource on node 1, so node 2, where you're stopping this cluster services. And whatever the VIPs, everything will be failed over to node 1. Again, we'll discuss in future class all this failover and how this transparent application failover tab will work, and all the concept will take it. Listener, how the VIPs will fail over, we'll discuss in future classes. But for now, we are stick to this the bouncing activity, how we can perform on this particular node 1 or node 2. That is stop, and then we can check the status. I can put here for checking status. Now, it will take quite some time because it has to stop all those multiple services. So meantime, let's go to node 1, and node 1 also you can do crctl stop crs hyphen f. So I can fire that stop command on node 2 as well. So node 2 also. Before that, I wanted to check crctl stat resource hyphen t on the node 1 plus ASM1. Right now you can see here your node 2 VIP intermediate and failed over to your node 1. So the moment we stop the services on node 2, all the VIPs failed over to node 1, including your scan 1, 2, 3, including your all the scan listeners, all the VIPs, everything is failed over on node 1. Right, it will take few more minutes. Attempting to stop your ONS done, and shutting down your cluster ID services done. Stopping of all the cluster resources here, MDNSD node to succeeded. Right, stop ASM is succeeded on node 2. Attempting to stop your CSSD. Your Oracle high availability service has been stopped on node 2. It's completely down. If I do PSF, or you can do this one, crctl check CRS on this node 2, nothing will be running here. Could not contact your Oracle high availability service daemon. You can do ps-ef grep d.bin. No cluster daemons running on this node 2. Everything is down here. Same thing, you can go to node 1, do crctl stop crs hyphen f. So you're gonna shut down your first node as well. The moment you shut down your first node as well, then it's going to be complete downtime. Node 2 already down, all the cluster resources, everything is down, and node 1 also you're shutting down here, all the cluster daemon resources. It's a complete downtime, right? Once you do a bounce node by node, you can start the cluster services. Like after you stop it, you can start the cluster services, CRS-CTL start CRS on node 1. And then once you do the start CRS, your all the cluster daemon, local resources, cluster resources, everything will be back online here. Let's see. Let it node 1 also let it go down, then you can start the cluster resources. Right, you can check it out each by each what it's going to do. It's going to do all the listener shutdown, all the local resource, cluster resource here, all the scan listeners, all the disk groups here, and then right and all the databases. Everything will be, it will be stopping one by one. Right now, it's doing attempting to stop your Aura ONS, Oracle Notification Service. Let it stop, and then we'll try to check this start. So there's one of the important interview questions you can expect. So when you start your cluster services, how we are going to monitor it. So once you start it, you're going to do CRSCTL stat resource hyphen t hyphen init. So we'll be keep on monitoring this command, and this command is going to give you all the cluster daemons. What we checked here, where is that one here? CRSCTL stat resource hyphen t hyphen init. They are going to give you all the cluster daemons or the cluster resources, whichever services which is getting stuck here, like GIPCD is the intermediate and which will be in starting state, and your CSSD is starting state and stuck at starting state. So you have to look for that respective log, which cluster resources getting stuck during the startup of your cluster, and you have to go to that particular log and then look for the uh, issue or the troubleshoot based upon the error signature on that respective log file. So each of these cluster resources, like right now, what are these cluster resources? Your all these cluster resources. ASM has its own log, cluster interconnect, it has log, CRF, CRSD, CSSD, CSSD monitor, CTSSD, diskmon, SAPS driver, EV, MD, GIPCD, GPNPD, MDNSD storage. All of these cluster resources has their respective trace files, and then whenever whichever service is getting stuck during the startup of your cluster, you have to look for that respective trace file. All right, node 1, CRSCTL stop CRS. Node 1 also went down. You can do CRSCTL check CRS. Oracle high availability service daemon is not available. You can check for the daemon grep d.bin. Your daemon service is also down. So now let's say I'm going to start my cluster resources on node 1 alone. I'm going to do CRSCTL start CRS. You're going to say your Oracle high availability service daemon is started. That's it. You're not going to wait for all the services to come online. So now as a DBA, I need to keep checking this command. CRCTL stat resource hyphen t hyphen init. It says your CSSD is starting, your CRF is starting. You have to keep monitoring this one. CSSD till it is starting, and already your SFS driver, GIPCD, GPNPD is online, and your CSSD is still starting state, and your CSSD is online. Now your CTSSD is starting and your cluster interconnect is starting state, and your cluster interconnect, your ASM is now starting. And again, still ASM is in starting. ASM is still in starting. ASM is still in starting. Right. So your ASM is started, your CRSD is started, the CTSSD, CSSD monitor, your GIPCD, GPNPD, everything is online now here. So all these resources are online. Again, this mon, which is offline, this is expected. This will be active only in Exadata. So please keep it aside for now. Don't worry about this why it is offline. This will be always offline in your on-premises environment. This is active only in Exadata systems. Other than that, everything is online. So which indicates your ASM and your all databases, everything should be up and running now. So you can do CRS-ETL, check CRS. So everything is online now. All right. Right. So with that, once we keep checking this CRS-ETL stat resource hyphen T hyphen init, so which is going to give us which services is not getting started, and we have to look into that respective trace file so that we can get to know why that service is not starting. That's a way how you can troubleshoot your cluster startup. This is going to be one of your common interview question. How to troubleshoot your cluster startup sequence. Very simple. You have to run this CRCTL stat resource hyphen T hyphen init during your cluster startup. So whichever service is not getting started or getting stuck, or which is getting stuck in the intermediate state, getting stuck in the starting state, or not coming online, then look for that particular log. For example, your CTSSD is not coming up. You can just do locate ctssd.trc. .trc. That's going to tell you the log which is located. Just do vi that particular log and go at the end, and you can see what error message it will report. Right now, no errors. Everything looks good, but you have to look in that particular direction so that you can easily troubleshoot your cluster startup sequence or the startup issues. Right. That is how you can bounce your cluster node by node using CRCTS stop CRS. And we have option to bounce your entire cluster node services across all the cluster node, like CRCTL stop cluster all. And then you can start CRCTL start cluster all. Like let's say here, I can do CRCTL stop cluster all. So it's gonna be shut down your all the cluster node 1, node 2, node 3, node 4, node 5. You have 10 nodes, all the 10 nodes, all the cluster daemons, services, everything will be down, including your ASM database and all the services. Right now, I'm doing it on node 1 as a root user. Let's say on node 2 also. grepsmon, everything is down now. Your ASM and database, everything went down. And you can do CRCTL check CRS, right? Could not contact your Oracle high availability service, and let it go on your second node as well. But node 2 is anyway down before we down this cluster all as well. So as it will stop cluster all. So that's going to stop your cluster daemons across all the nodes, including your all the cluster services, local services, cluster daemons. And then you can do CRCT start cluster all, which is going to start across all the cluster node. So it's a complete downtime. You want to do it a 8 node or 4 node rack cluster complete downtime, non-rolling patching or any downtime maintenance activity. You can do this one from one node. You're going to shut down from all the cluster daemons and cluster resource, local resources across all the cluster nodes. Or you can do CRCTL stop CRS hyphen F from all the nodes. So that's also works fine, or this also works fine. Based upon your interest or your comfort level, you can use whichever command you want to do this cluster shutdown. Right, still it is shutting down. It's going to take few more minutes. Right, that's what I wanted to cover in this today's session. How you can do your rack cluster maintenance, bouncing your cluster resource or the cluster daemons. And we have a special note here, your Oracle MOS documentation 1053147.1, which tells about what all the use cases of your CRSCTL command, and there will be hundreds of command you can make use of your CRSCTL. So these are your CRSCTL commands. So there will be, like as I told, hundreds of commands you can practice, and then you can get used to it. Right? There will be hundreds or thousands of commands where you can make use of your day-to-day operation CRCTL. All right, guys, let's wrap it up for today. We'll continue in our next class with further more insight on the rack clusterware. Thank you.